Good afternoon and welcome once again to our Monday afternoon lecture series. It's nice to see so many of you here and so many of you happy and healthy and recovering from a hard working weekend. From here on out, folks, all you have to do is remember one thing: Monday at 4 o'clock. Monday at 4 o'clock. Every Monday from now until the end of the semester, we have a lecture scheduled here in this room at 4 o'clock. So Mondays at 4, we've got a really good lineup still to go. I know that now we're starting to get towards the busy part of the semester, but I guarantee you that the rest of these lectures on Mondays are going to be ones that you're not going to want to miss. So we'll see you here again in a week from today. Without any more from me, I'd like to invite Professor Gray to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you all for coming. Today, it's my privilege to introduce our guest speaker, Andrew Freear, who is joining us from Auburn University, where Andrew is the professor of architecture and the acting co-director of the Rural Studio in Newburgh, Alabama. Since its inception in the early 1990s, when the Rural Studio was founded by Sam Mockbee, the work produced by the studio and the methods employed have had a profound impact on the profession throughout this country and beyond. To quote Andrea Dean from her book, Rural Studio, published in 2002, which I know we have here, and I suggest you all take a good close look at. The best way to make real architecture is by letting a building evolve out of the culture and the place. The small projects featured in this book are designed by students at the studio and remind us what it means to have an American architecture without pretense. They offer us a simple glimpse into what is essential to the future of American architecture: its honesty. I was lucky enough to go down along with most of the third-year class last fall and visit Auburn University and the Rural Studio. Like most people, I strongly identified the studio with the work of Sam Mockbee, and wasn't sure what I would find following the tragic death of Sam Mockbee in 2001. I'm happy to say that what I found, in addition to a compelling body of existing work, was a group of extremely enthusiastic students and a dedicated faculty carrying the work forward with energy and commitment. Andrew Freear is a central figure in the next generation of work that is being and will be produced at the Rural Studio. And I'm happy and honored that he's with us today to share his thoughts as well as some of the recent work from the Rural Studio. Andrew.
Can you all hear me up there? Those folks hiding behind computer screens up there, can you all hear me? You can hear me. Okay, stop each other. I'm not crap. Okay. Ignore the message from the guy third row along. He's absolutely wrong about my sexuality as well. Okay, so thank you to Tim and to Kevin and to Ball State University for inviting me in here to talk about the Rural Studio's work. I'd also just like to say a big thank you to Tony Costello. I don't think he's here today, but he's been a huge supporter over the years to the Rural Studio, and as some of you might have seen, he played a big part in the PBS documentary that was made about the Rural Studio. So thank you, Tony. I don't think you're here, but we all love you, Tony. Obviously, you're all disappointed that this guy's not here to talk to you tonight. He'd be much funnier than I am. And he certainly wouldn't allow folks to sit at the back with their laptops open. He'd probably be up there with a sledgehammer, actually. This is a big fat white guy from Mississippi with the ridiculously unpolitically correct name of Sambo Mockbee. I had the opportunity to see him lecture about 8 years ago in Chicago, and was really blown away by his commitment and his passion. I really hadn't seen anybody, or had seen an American American architect speaking about the work in the manner that he did. And I kind of fell in love with what he was doing. And 3 years later, I had the opportunity to go down to Rural Studio, and it really changed my life a lot. Before he set up the Rural Studio, he was in practice with a guy called Coleman Coker, and I think they probably had one of the better known and most renowned firms in the southern part of the United States of America. It was up there with Max Scoggin and Merrill Elam's practice in terms of doing innovative work. Anyway, he had a pretty large family, and he really wasn't making ends meet, and so he got an offer of a job at Auburn, and he went over to Auburn and started teaching on the campus. And a couple of years later, he decided that he'd had enough of that, and so he went out into the woods of West Alabama and set up this thing known as the Rural Studio. And that was now 13 years ago. In the middle of all that, he managed to contract leukemia. 6 years ago, I think he got leukemia. And he was actually 3 years in remission when he died. We really were extremely shocked about his death because he was really beginning to get through it all. He had been through all the chemotherapy treatments, and they were taking him off all the nasty medication, and he was really hot to trot. But we took him home at Christmas 3 years ago, and because we thought he had pneumonia in his lungs, and 12 days later he was dead, and it was a huge shock. In the middle of all that, he was given the MacArthur Fellowship, which is better known as the Genius Award, and obviously it's not very often that you have the honor or the privilege of working with a genius, but I guess I did. I was with him for about 3 years. He perhaps wasn't a genius, but he was a pretty smart guy, and he told lots of naughty stories and drank lots of beer and told lots of many silly jokes. So he was a really pretty special human being. I'm not so sure he was a genius, but we'll see. I think that the term is overused. Certainly his brilliance was actually, and I think often people are confused that the Rural Studio is actually the architecture office of Samuel Mockbee. And it's absolutely not. All of the work you're going to see tonight is designed and built by people of your age and younger, between the ages of 18, 19, and about 23. And what his genius was actually affording those guys the opportunity to do that. What I'm going to do a little bit tonight, there's one other thing, of course, I should say. This last year, the American Institute of Architects, which is a kind of an eminently conservative organization, made the remarkable gesture of giving him the AIA Gold Medal, which I think was a huge boost to the Rural Studio, was a huge kind of tribute to him and his family. But hopefully it sort of throws out there the question, which I hope is what the Rural Studio does, which is sort of basically how do you teach and educate architects? And I'm not going to stand here tonight and tell you that everyone should have a Rural Studio, but I would plead for a kind of a balance of different experiences across your education. Not just the Rural Studio, but not just digital media at the other end of the spectrum. What is the balance and what's the critical dialogue that goes on between those things? I guess I've been at the Rural Studio for the last 5 years. Of course, I have a silly accent. Everyone's always disappointed when I don't come out with a southern drawl. So I think that I hope what I can do tonight, the book is a nice piece of propaganda, and the pictures are very nice, but frankly it doesn't really tell very much of the stories of the making of the projects. So I'm going to try and let you in on the inside of some of the anecdotal things about some of the projects that I think is really the most important part of the Rural Studio education. Being there, being part of a very small community and working in teams, it creates an awful lot of naughtiness. And I'm going to try and let you in on that. I also, I hope, come at it with something of a critical eye. Hopefully I still have a relatively critical eye relative to the work. Of course, I am an outsider, and I probably never will be an insider in West Alabama, but I've also it's consumed my life completely for the last 5 years, so I'm very much a product of what you see as well. The other thing I'm going to do very quickly, and then you can turn the lights down if you want, I'm going to read a few things that are the kind of grown-up things that I always forget to say. So just bear with me as I go through a few of these slides, and then I'll get very much more anecdotal. The Rural Studio is an undergraduate educational program that's part of the 5-year BArc at Auburn University. Now in its 13th year, it was set up by D.K. Ruth and Sambo as a response to 2 things. There was a desire to have a more hands-on approach for architecture students and an interest in exploring the definitive rural house. First of all, I suppose I should give you a quick geography lesson. This is the good old United States of America that likes to invade small, innocent little countries. Y'all are the, I guess you're that kind of faded light brown thing up there. We're the pink one with the foot down here, with the kind of the 1 foot down here, okay? I need a stick. Has anyone got a stick? You don't use sticks around here? I don't, if I have a laser pointer, I'll kill somebody, so. No one's got a stick. Okay, well, that mountain range that comes down into Alabama, into the pink thing, is known as the Appalachian Mountain Trail. And it's very important to our particular location because it, along with that range of mountains, it brings with it some dirt called what we call the Black Belt. And it's important that you know that the Black Belt is called the Black Belt because of the dirt, not because there's a whole bunch of black folks live there. The state of Alabama is split up into over 100 counties. We, the Rural Studio, over here in New Bern, we live in a county known as Hale County. Hale County is the 2nd poorest county in the 2nd poorest state. Auburn, the university, is over in the east part of Alabama. Part of Mockbey's genius was putting the Rural Studio in West Alabama when the university's in East Alabama. What it does is it allows all sorts of naughtiness to take place out there that deans and provosts and vice chancellors and all those kind of boring types, they don't let you kind of have fun in your own backyard. So that's a really important part of what the Rural Studio is. It's 3 hours away from the university. They don't come visit us too often. The other thing that's very important for the location of the Rural Studio is this triangle, the civil rights triangle of Selma, Birmingham, and Montgomery. Clearly, and I hope that most of you know your history, but obviously that particular triangle has a huge effect on the history and the well, I live with it every day. It's a hugely important part of our everyday life, being in that particular part of the world. The chosen location, Hale County, Alabama, is an area well documented in the 30s by James Agee and Walker Evans in the seminal Letters Now Face Famous Men. And quite frankly, little has changed. This is Walker Evans' Greensboro. Oh, fantastic. Now I get to wake people up if they fall asleep on me. This is great. Easy. I've wanted one of these for a while. Oh, look at that, though. That's very kind of Rural Studio-ish, though, isn't it? Couldn't be straight. This is Greensboro, circa 1930s. This was a photograph taken by Walker Evans. This is Greensboro when I arrived 5 years ago. So you can see that really, truly very little has changed. This is a sharecropper's home, circa 1930s, again from Walker Evans. This is a photograph that I took very recently of a home in Mason's Bend. Now, if Mockbey was here, he'd probably be getting quite upset and banging his chest, because he really couldn't abide the conditions of Hale County. There's 16,000 inhabitants of Hale County. 36% of that population lives below the poverty line. Over 40% of the kids under the age of 5 live below the poverty line. Now, I don't know, I'm not an American, but that kind of frightens me and disgusts me. And it should disgust you all, because that really, it's quite ridiculous. So, you know, the Rural Studio is not trying to save the world, but it also tries to open some of its students' eyes to the kind of situation that there is going on in Hale County. You all might remember these photographs when you're all voting tomorrow. It's a beautiful faith-based place, and religion is absolutely everywhere. There's evidence of the old great wealth, and there's also incredible evidence of poverty. And of course, this could be, you know, this could be Johannesburg. This could be some part of a sad place in South Africa somewhere, quite frankly. But I would also say there's incredible dignity. This is Alberta Bryant. She was the client for the first house that the Rural Studio did, and that's her husband Shep, who died this summer. They are part of a small fishing community in West Alabama known as Mason's Bend. And Alberta probably is the most dignified woman I've ever met in my entire life. If there's any woman that I've ever met who has right to complain, it's her. She has had a very, very dismal existence as far as I'm concerned, but she's found, you know, meaning in her life through her religion and through her family. And I never have heard a complaint come from this woman at all. An extraordinary, extraordinary dignity. The other thing is that if you go visit her, and she's had such a terrible diet that she's lost both her legs because of diabetes. If you go down there, she particularly with the nephews and nieces, she gets hold of her false leg and she kind of wields it as a weapon against them. So, you know, the kids start to mess around and she threatens them with the false leg. There's a joke in there somewhere. Come on, you all, get into this. Since the demise of cotton, it's a landscape that barely sustains the logging industry and the catfish industry. Now, this is an important slide. This is because this guy with the red hat is a guy called Laird Cole. He's West Alabama Young Farmer of the Year. The dairy farmers have all they've tried to diversify because dairy farming it's a very difficult place to make a living. And what they found with the red dirt, that is the black belt dirt, is if you dig a hole, it contains water. So at some point in the 1970s, with Auburn University of all people, they discovered that they could actually pond raise freshwater fish out here, and they did it with catfish. So they've spawned a really pretty successful catfish industry, diversified into that. And it's relatively successful, but it's still just scraping a living. They work incredibly hard, these folks. One thing I should just say, the guy Laird Cole in the center, he's desperately looking for a wife. And I told him that I was coming up to Indiana, so if there's anyone out there that's really interested in him, male or female, he's not too fussy. I'll give you his email address at the end, okay? He would treat you like a king or even a queen if you wanted to be treated that way. This is something known as seining. This is getting the catfish out of the pond. Unfortunately, catfish is only at 50 cents a pound at the moment. It means it's breaking even. So these guys, you know, it's a very, very tough life. But remember that slide for later on. What I'm trying to do is just build up a little picture of what's important. One of the things I think that's made the Rural Studio successful is staying in a place, becoming local. We have 3 people on our team who actually are from there. We live there. I think focusing and living in one place, I hope, has made us part of that community. There are many things that I love about the place, some of the rural architecture. There's sort of evidence of African carpentry on this old plantation building. With the central entrance to this thing. This was built by Negro carpenters, and you can see that, I mean, I would die for a building with that kind of cantilever. It's really, really very beautiful. Sundays, they all go to church. They all get dressed up. They don't dress like a slob like I do. I mean, I think they have certain priorities in this part of the Deep South that I kind of admire. And Sunday is for the church and it's for the family. And their kind of life is not so homogeneous as mine is. So I really admire that. I'm not so certain I admire this. This is what they call sport in West Alabama. This is a friend of mine, Jim Witherspoon, who, this is a 14-pointer. This is a buckhead, and he proudly displays his kill, and this was posted in the local gas station, so he's proud of his 14-pointer. But I'm not so sure it's sport. So that's the landscape that Mockbee took this thing into. It's really a landscape of deforestation. Most of Alabama is actually owned by people who don't live in Alabama. 75% of the land is owned by people who don't live there. We're at the behest and the beholden to paper companies, and they come in and they cut down huge, great swaths of timber. And so often the landscape can look like that, deforestation. It's a landscape of trailer homes. The trailer home is low-income housing. I find it very hard to beat the trailer home because it's financed the same as an automobile. If I want my dream home tomorrow, I can go to a trailer home lot, and I can put a down payment for it and take it away immediately. If I'm building someone a home, it might take me 6 months to a year to build it. So that's kind of the opposition. So that's why this place is full of trailer homes. It's also full of pickup trucks. We all like to be kind of macho and drive around in pickup trucks. So it's a place that I found really beautiful. Can you turn the lights down? Any chance of turning this one off? Mockbee, as I say, went out to West Alabama 13 years ago. This is where we settled. This is a place called New Bern. This is Main Street, New Bern. There's about 6 buildings. If you drive too quickly through there and blink, you'll miss it. The red building is the new studio, but this is where Mockbee started it. He took a studio, literally a studio of 13 people there, and never really intended it to kind of grow into the monster that it is. I would suggest it gives students 3 really kind of amazing experiences. One is an exposure to the arts and crafts tradition, the making and the crafting of architecture. The second is a kind of an immersion in a very small rural community. I came from New Bern this morning. It's 200 people. It's probably less than there are here tonight. And then the students have to work in teams. And I think for you all to have the experience of working in teams is very, very important, because at the end of the day, that's probably what you'll be doing out there in the real world. And negotiating situations and designs with teammates leads to an awful lot of fuss. I mean, most of my time, I'm more of the kind of a social worker than I'm a teacher. I mean, the fights that they get into about their projects are really pretty extraordinary. The one other thing that I should mention, a couple of things. Everything you're about to see, for 10 years until Mockbee died, the university didn't give it any money. So it was all pretty much done on soft money, which is grant money. The other thing that's really important to know, and it's probably the big secret of the Rural Studio, is that there is no money to police the building permit process here. So even if I do drawings, which we do, there's actually not a permit guy for me to hand the drawings to. So it makes our life an awful lot easier, quote unquote, if I don't have to go through a process of getting a permit to make these buildings. You have to do that if you're building here, or if you're building in Indianapolis, or any of, this community has decided it's not going to pay for the building permit process to be overseen, and it's very important. So I think, maybe Mockbee was an opportunist, but it has allowed us to do some things that really, I think it's a sort of a situation where it's more like a social agreement. We'll drive on the right-hand side of the road, you drive on the right-hand side of the road, and we won't crash into each other. We don't kind of take advantage of it probably as much as I would. The students really want to build things that won't burn down. They want to build them as close to code as possible, but there's a kind of a social agreement about where to draw the line. So quickly, I'll take you to New Bern and show you around New Bern a little bit. This is the world headquarters of the Rural Studio, the Morissette House. This is where Mockbee started it. This was donated to the Rural Studio by an Alabama alumni, which is the sworn enemy of Auburn, which is kind of, miracles do happen, I guess. This is in the backyard of that. It's a thing called the super shed. And the second-year undergraduate males live there. So the women live in the lap of luxury in here with the jacuzzis and their saunas and their hairdryers and everything. And the guys are out in the pods underneath the super shed roughing it. These are the pods that were built by the first thesis students that came out to the Rural Studio. And you can see at that time it was, I've got this opportunity to come out to the Rural Studio and I'm going to design this thing. And they basically, after 5 years at architecture school, were so desperate to kind of show everything that they learned that they literally just kind of threw up. So, there is every possible architectural thingamajig and gizmo that you've ever seen in your entire life in a pod that's about, 150 square feet. So they're not so bad, but... And then down at the bottom, you'll just see in that slide to the far left is the famous shithouse. It's covered in Hale County license plates, which you just see here on the far left. Mockbee used to say that he thought that Frank Gehry had stolen this idea for the Guggenheim. I'm not so certain that this isn't better than that. These are the kind of idiots that we have to deal with. The lady in the center, I think, went to Harvard, so there's no accounting for taste. This is a house further up the road that we bought for $3,000. That's an early photograph of me in the center. There's a joke in there somewhere. And then this is how it. This is a condition it was bought in. It was actually bought in. This is it today. I live in that room in the top left. If anyone wants to come visit me, I get very lonely. And this is Main Street. This is the rest of Newbern. The white building is our former studio. The red building is a new building that we've just taken over. The thesis work on the top floor. The second year is on the ground floor. In winter, it is very cold. In summer, it is very hot. This is the building. There's some hunky thesis pretending to do some work. And then further down in the metropolis is the post office and G.B. Wood's General Store. Mockbee used to call G.B.'s store the Students' Union because they give you this little 8.5 by 11 card, and you can build up a significant debt to G.B. Here's Frances, our postmaster. She refuses to be called the postmistress for some reason, so she is definitely the postmaster. And then here's my neighbor, Henry, with GB, and notice there his very healthy diet. And across the road we were given this property, literally just given it. We were given the land and the property. The problem with the building was that it has a lien on it by Alabama Historical Commission, and we have to do a historic restoration of it. So at the moment it's not really going anywhere, unless some of you rich folks from up north here have got some money you'd like to donate to us. So instead what we did was we went in the backyard and dug a big hole and made ourselves an amphitheater. And this is, the building is actually right in the center of Newbern. On the one side are the poor black folks, and on the other side are the kind of rich white folks. And so it becomes this place where we can actually have public performances, events. We've had theater performances, we've had film nights there, and so we try and be this kind of neutral armature for things to happen. Just one thing I should tell you about is when we started digging this hole, Alabama Historical Commission said, we're going to need to come down there and do an excavation of the site. And I said, well, why are you going to do that? He said, well, there might be something buried there of historic significance. And I said, well, but that's ridiculous. This building, when they gave us the building and the site, the building was actually 10 miles away. And they moved the building in 3 parts to the site. So they were digging up the backyard, the wrong backyard. So, and they said, well, it doesn't matter. We still need to do it. So they sent three archaeologists down with knives and forks to dig around in the backyard. Found a whole bunch of Coke cans. And anyway, the moral of that story is they can afford to do that for the old white architecture. but they won't foot the bill for somebody to police the building permit process, which is about kind of basic human necessity. So think about that just a little, if you're still awake. I don't know. Rural Studio. The Rural Studio has changed significantly over the last 3 years. Obviously, this guy dropped dead. That guy got sick. And the guy in the top left, he ran off with a woman from New York. So I was left with these two women at the front, which is fine by me. But what it meant was we had to go out and hire a couple of guys that were really interested in cross-dressing. So this is the current faculty. They're an interesting group. And these the other thing that we've set up out there is we have a fantastic relationship with the local prison camp. And they will send us out inmates and they work on our 3 properties because to maintain 3 properties actually costs a fortune. And it's fantastic for them because they're coming to the end of their sentences, and it's fantastic for us because it's a good deal. And it kind of adds to this sort of ridiculous mix, if you like. So this is the second years. We have 3 sets of students. We encourage them to talk with each other and negotiate very sensibly and quietly, and not beat each other over the head. But they are out there for a semester, and they design a charity house over 2 semesters. So the first semester, there's always this kind of big negotiation goes on between the 2 semesters. But it's a relatively traditional process, much the same manner that you all go through. You each design a project, you'll get together and kind of negotiate and see what are the kind of the common threads, and then you'll present it to the client. We make lots of models, we make lots of 3-dimensional drawings so that our client can understand what the hell we're doing. And then, lo and behold, they go out on site and they build it. And they do everything from electric to plumbing, put the foundation in, they put the roof on, they do the finishes, they do the whole thing. We'll have it, licensed electricians and plumbers come and check that stuff, but we typically do everything. Although you'll see on some of the big projects we've kind of contracted some things out. But the idea is that the student gets to experience the project and understand the implication of every line that they've drawn. This is an example of a thesis project really quickly. The thesis come out in teams. There's normally about 12 of them. They come out in either groups of 3 or groups of 4. They propose their project. They find the funding. They program the project. They do all the planning. They do all of it, okay? This is an example. This is a pavilion for a park in the county next over from us. This Perry County had no outdoor recreational space, and so the probate judge had actually gone out and found a $110,000 grant to reopen this park, and he asked us to essentially be the architect. And this is the kind of process that they go through. Obviously, they begin to kind of present to each other. We have a lot of sort of in-house crits. They make drawings, site investigative drawings. They collect things from the site. I encourage them to be on site every day, so they're really beginning to feel and understand the place. They make 3-dimensional drawings that their client can understand. They make lots and lots of models, huge numbers of models. They go on site and they test the scale of things to understand how they might fit into the place. They do an enormous number of kind of detailed drawings. The Rural Studio is always accused of never drawing anything. It's absolutely not true. There's an awful lot of drawing done at the Rural Studio. It's simply not the last, it's not the end of the line. The drawing kind of gets thrown away in the excitement to build the thing. A lot of detailed mock-ups. Even I've done virtual fly-throughs of projects so that the community folks at meetings can actually understand what they're getting. And, this is not kind of Columbia graphics with blobs and things that are doing all this. This is, that is definitely a tree. And it has branches on it, and it's virtually a cartoon. But it seemed to us that our client could more readily understand this than something else. We have reviews on site. Then they get to present to their client. This particular client, there's 2 county commissioners, the probate judge, the mayor, a couple of local school teachers. So it's a very diverse client body. And they learn to present to their client. We rehearse every time. It's a hugely important part of what they do because, you know, even if you make a beautiful drawing, if you stand up and what comes out your mouth is absolute nonsense, it's all for nothing. So we rehearse a heck of a lot. They get themselves on the front of the newspaper asking for material donations. And then they go on site. They work with local contractors. We hire machinery, or they will use some of the machinery that we have. This particular project, we used a lot of cedar because it was in a floodplain, and we wanted to use some material that would last a long time. The material they had donated, because it had been on the front of the newspaper, was cedar. They wanted to do a cedar deck, and so what they did for the footings, because when they milled the trees, they had all of the bark left. So inside the formwork for the footings, they put bark on the inside, and when you take the formwork off, it leaves a residue of bark in the footing. It's actually pretty detailed. Again, local contractors will help us with some of the heavy lifting, particularly the structural welding. And then everyone stands around and drinks beer when the local guy puts it up. But the interesting thing begins when you really understand what you've done, when you've made yourself a structure that's 27 feet high up. And the implications of working 27 feet up in the air, particularly when your teacher won't allow you to wear a hard hat and makes you stand up there without a hard hat. That was a joke, y'all. Okay. You're a hard audience out here in Indiana. You know, learning-wise, these huge, great glulam beams, they have a series of rafters going in between them. It was really interesting that I went out there and I helped them lay the first set of rafters, and we did all the rafters parallel to each other. And then this thing fans out towards the end, and they had decided that the best way to distribute the load was by fanning the rafters. And I said, please don't fan the rafters, because when you put the plywood on top, you won't be able to find them. But they still went and fanned them anyway. So you can see at the end, they begin to fan. So I think they had a really good time trying to find the 2x when they were nailing through the plywood through the top. Anyway. Another question is, you know, again, we'd had lots of discussions about how many times to build the roof. You put the glulam beam up, you put the rafters up, you put the plywood down, you put the ice and water barrier down, you put the metal down. So you built the thing 5 times, and then you've got to go back up with scaffolding and put the ceiling on the underside, because you want to put some sexy metal on the underside, because we want to do sexy metal. So there was a huge discussion about that, and honestly, they were right. They taught themselves how to use a metal brake, and this is how it looks. They were right. The metal brings borrowed light in under the pavilion that's really very pretty, and I think I would have encouraged them not to do it, but the difference it makes to this pavilion is pretty extraordinary. I like this project, so I've shown a lot of slides of it. Again, it's this sort of wrapping deck that wraps up and makes the seating, wraps up and makes the entrance. There's a piece at the back that is the sunset porch where you sit and you cuddle. These are a couple of guys that were caught kissing. And then this is a couple of guys suggesting that this is actually the team suggesting I'm the #1 professor in the world. Anyway, Hurricane Ivan came through with huge amount of violence, and this was right next to the pavilion. So last week we found this, unfortunately. So this tree, this one here was virtually hollow, and it snapped it off at the bottom, and it went straight through the glulam. Glulam's 15 inches deep, but the pin connections at the 2 ends survived, which just blew our minds. So, and it blew the footing out. So you can see there was a lot of force. To that rural studio community, we've added a group known as the outreach students. And these are students from all over the United States of America, and in fact all over the world, who come and do projects on the edge of the rural studio that can kind of do things that you can't do with the degree program. It's a little bit more experimental. one lady was a 40-year-old photographer from Philadelphia, and she came down and she decided she wanted to really explore the idea of local people. She wanted to encourage organic farming, and so she built an organic farming stand for one of the local folks that was one of the local organic farmers. This is something known as hog wire. It's a big metal frame with infill panels of all sorts of kind of thrown away road signs and different materials. Richard Saxton went to York, Alabama, which is about 40 miles west of us, and he went on eBay and he bought 3 tricycles, and then he made the tricycles into road sweeping vehicles, put a trash container on the back, and it allowed York, Alabama to have a way to pick up its trash. And then Lucy Begg, she there was an existing trailer chassis next to another trailer, and we wanted to explore the idea of encouraging somebody to live more of their life outside, because these trailer homes are like sardine cans. There's no cross ventilation, they're really kind of just hot boxes. And so we gave this lady the opportunity to live her life, at least perhaps 60–70% of the year she could live outside. So far, I would say that she's doing 30–40% of her life outside. So, you know, it's testing something a little bit. So quickly, kind of a survey of the past Rural Studio projects, and then I'll get into the new ones that you probably haven't seen. This is the hay bale house, straw bale house. This is a little house that we'd built first. It's covered in concrete stucco. It has a classic southern porch. It's really, the southern porch is the big outside room. And then the little building next to it here is a thing called the smokehouse, which is made of broken roadside concrete. This is how it looks today. It's actually lasted pretty well. The little wagon wheels sticking out of the back are kind of notional spaces for the nephews and the nieces to live in. This is where they used to live. They left in a rush. They didn't have any hot water or any running water or electricity. And this was how it was finished. And you'll see that these folks live in a pretty unceremonious manner. This is Alberta and Shepherd's house. That's how it looks today. Kevin was talking about today how, you know, how people live. Well, this is it's the most unromantic way to live, but Alberta, you know, loves this home more than anything in the world, and the kind of the relationship she built it with Mockbee was really important. The outside, the porch again becomes this kind of, it's kind of full of stuff. You know, I think it irritates a lot of people, but you know, it's kind of unceremonious and unpretentious. This is Shepherd. Unfortunately, he died this last summer. One of the great things about going to Mason's Bend was hearing the cockerels crow when you went down there, and I think he was a little bit of a cockerel in his day as well. There's only one guy at the front here who gets my jokes. It's cool. And the smokehouse was made of broken roadside concrete. It had a series of bottles put inside it. So, you know, Mockbee called it the Alabama Ronchon. It was made of old railroad structure and covered in roadside signs from around Hale County. So there's kind of a pretty space in there. Again, hugely important, the relationship between the teaching faculty and the client. I think more recently we've had problems with that, and the project has grown astray. Second house is the butterfly house. Again, the kind of classic southern porch. Classic two-semester project. The dumb stuff at the back was built first, and then the second semester group came and said, we want to do something weird and wacky, of course, because they always want to outdo each other at the Rural Studio. And they put this really pretty beautiful screened-in porch on the front that Anderson and Ora Lee actually, you know, really did inhabit 3/4 of the year. It has a fireplace in there as well. So We've forgotten how to build buildings that are naturally ventilated, particularly in the south. I mean, the city of Atlanta has really shown the way with air conditioning. And I think most people down here want to be in a sealed container with an air conditioning unit. And we're kind of doing our best to kind of challenge those preconceptions. This is the space of Mason's Bend. This is how the house looks today. Unfortunately, Aurelie and Anderson both died a couple of years ago, so their daughter inherited the house. Going back to this issue of the kind of the unpretentious way they live their lives, this is how the house was finished. This is how it was a little while back. You can see they kind of cover the walls with kind of newspaper cuttings. They're really interested in sort of taking pictures out of magazines. So you can, one thing that always used to blow my mind is they have a photograph of George Bush next to Martin Luther King, which is like, what the hell's going on there? Most recently, second year house, we did it for a very shy and unassuming character known as Music Man. He lives at 334 Bates Mill Road, and he's in the telephone book as Mr. I's Cancer. He is the only person in Hale County with a motor scooter, and he collects everything. I mean, he just collects shit, and he just collects it. And he has all of these little houses and structures that are just full of this stuff. I should quickly tell you about his motorcycle. There was a new policeman in Greensboro, and he gave Music Man 3 tickets. And Music Man got terribly upset about this. And the local county court judge called the police officer up and said, look, you've got to go tear those tickets up, because Music Man, you cannot give tickets to Music Man. He's above the law. So you can see the kind of community we live in. He's called Music Man, for a variety of reasons. He collects stereo equipment. If you go down there, it's normally beating out at about 500 decibels, and you can never find the off switch for these things. So, and he marks his territory. I mean, he's, there's no other way of putting it. He marks his territory, but he was amazing with the students. He was on site every day. This is a guy who was really, we did him a house because he was so well loved by the community, both black and white. And we found that he was living in really ridiculous conditions. So he lived and he worked with the students every day. The house we ended up doing was a little wood frame house with a little piece added on the side of it that's kind of a little kind of, I don't know, a sort of a little squiggle. But the notion was to challenge the students to do a very simple wood frame house like that. Okay, I understand that. But then how do you do, a wood frame house where you've got the walls that are moving? And this house sort of slid in between some trees, some cedar trees that Music Man had planted in his youth. Again, that's Music Man and Jay, the second year professor. And this is how it was finished. It's very idiosyncratic. It's very mannerist. I don't, you'll all have your opinion about it. In my view, what was nice about it was it kind of fits perfectly in with his character. He was a willing part of the whole negotiation of this project and loved it. He's probably the happiest man I've ever met in my life now. He has this furniture that moves. The students used skateboard wheels and attached it to the horizontal bracing in the roof, so you can move the furniture from one side to the other. So the bed here, if it gets cold, he can actually move it across to near the fireplace. A view of his bathroom is kind of this manipulation of the space to make a toilet and a shower space. He has an outside shower. He worked with a local artist to make himself a mural. All of these things, these big pieces of tin, are an early warning mechanism against imposters. So you stand on that tin and the dogs bark, and everyone knows, he knows that someone's coming. He's a little timid, but the building to the right, and there's 4 buildings, there's this little campus of buildings that we wanted to demolish, and he said, no, these are monuments to my brother and my sister and my mother. So we've probably just given him another little house to full of crap, but we'll see. Yeah. And this is the entrance gate. Again, don't throw grenades at me, please. He has his own personalized entranceway in the center. So there's an entrance gate on the center that allows him to drive his motor scooter through. And you can open the gates fully to bring a truck through it. But the very nice thing about this is that he started to use it himself as an armature for his signs. So hopefully he'll take it over and it'll become kind of less of an arts piece. We do more grown-up things. This is a pavilion, one of the first thesis projects, made of old railroad ties. It's the same, of old railroad timbers. It's the same material that we use for the super shed. This was built with no water and electricity next to a bayou in the north part of the county. The Yancey Tire Chapel, it's made of 900 tires, full of dirt with rebar rammed through it and then covered in pink concrete and a recycled tin roof on the top. And the siting of this project is extraordinary. This is a kind of a ravine. So you enter at this end, and as you go into the space, the ravine opens up in front of you. So the kind of the pulpit is hanging over the edge of the space. It's pretty extraordinary, and it's virtually impossible to photograph it. So this is looking out over the view. You can see the pulpit on the left, and then this is standing on the pulpit looking back. This is one of the stories of this project is that roof structure was, the way they built the roof was they put the scaffolding in place first, and then they took the material for the scaffolding to make the roof. So as the scaffolding reduced, the roof grew. That's one of those kind of myths, I think. But these are the guys that built it. That's how it looks at night. It's very, very beautiful. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the Royal Studio couldn't make sure that all its projects were done on public property. And the lady that inherited this building has changed the mind about this building and its relationship to Auburn. So she won't let anyone go visit this thing. And it's a real shame because it's one of the most extraordinary pieces of architecture I think I've ever seen. On the same property is a house that we did as a guest house. Again, at the beginning, you kind of jump in bed with people that maybe you sometimes will regret in the future. And we can't, we are denied access to this. But this is called the goat house because they found it inhabited by goats, of course. But they built this central kind of dog trot that's really very, they spent 2 years doing the details on this thing. And it's a little bit Martha Stewart for me, but it's really still beautiful, I think. Downtown Greensboro, we worked with Hero. It's a local not-for-profit organization. We gave them a children's center because the kids that were being abused, they had to be driven 25 miles in a squad car. And so the Hero, they're a not-for-profit social services organization. They asked us to make these two spaces, one for the kids to be interviewed in and one for them to play in. And basically it's connected down the center by this big dog trot. It's pretty much two dumb boxes with this dog trot roof down the center. That's the classroom space. And then the playground in the back was built by two landscape architecture students. Quickly down to Mason's Bend, and this is kind of a fast survey. This is, again, that pocket of poverty where we built those two houses. This is a little chapel that we built of rammed earth. It's rammed earth with an aluminum roof and then Chevrolet Caprice windows wrapping over the top. You can just see it in the back there. The idea, they had this idea, and the three guys drove up to Chicago to a kind of a junkyard, and it was one of those deals where you could take as much as you wanted for $50. And so they carried 150 windshields out of this place. And they found that the best windshield to use was a Chevrolet Caprice because it had two screw holes already in it. You can see them up here. So they came back to Alabama and they built themselves a mock-up and then they installed it on the project. So this kind of very nice fish skin thing that, you know, our climate can allow us to get away with this kind of thing. This is really an outdoor pavilion. This is how it was finished. The layers of the rammed earth. Pretty small space, but it's used on Thursday nights. The women in the community come out there and they have a cookout and they have a sing-song together. Very religious community. And then during the summer holidays, the kids get their free summer meals out there. So up to Akron, we built a Boys and Girls Club out of this old shell. The kids had nowhere to go when school was finished because most of their parents are working 25 miles away. This is a team of guys that built it. Conceptually, it was the kind of the new building coming out of the old. This is the backyard, the space on the inside. These trusses are a nice story. In the middle of the design process, we had no idea how to roof this building. And someone called up, a guy from Birmingham called up and he said, look, we've got this whole bunch of trusses for a shoe factory in Florida. Is there anything you can do about it? So the students went up there, measured these trusses and said, hell yeah, we can use them. And so he helped them re-engineer the bar joists. And then they asked a local community college if they would re-weld the ends of the bar joists. So the welding program at the community college re-welded the ends of the bar joists. And then the students asked the community college if they would deliver the trusses to site because the community college had a truck driving program as well. So the community college delivered it to site as well. So after that long story, they actually got these trusses for nothing, and they're probably worth about $25,000. So, cardboard house. We did a little cardboard pod for ourselves, wax impregnated cardboard. When you make a box that contains meat or fish and you stamp the box, the stuff around the edge, they shred up. And there's nothing they can do about it because it's wax. They can't recycle it. So they put them in these bales that are between 750 and 1,200 pounds each, and they throw them in a landfill. They're throwing 100 of these in the landfill a day because they can't find anything else to do with them. So we decided to try out building a little house. And of course, first of all, we tried burning one because that's the first thing everyone says. And will they burn, of course? And what happened was they smolder. They're so tightly compacted that the oxygen can't get into them. If you go in there and you break it open and the oxygen get in, it goes up like that. But if you leave them, this thing actually smoldered for 3 days. And that's what it did to the section. So it really didn't eat the section at all. We used them for the foundation. We then built a ring beam to deal with differential settlement and also to provide a flat surface. The students come out and do some work when the cameraman shows up. They actually stack them on top. We did a running bond and a stack bond, put a little roof on it. Again, the major contradiction of the project is, you have a wall with 4 million, an R value of 4 million, and then you put a little thin roof on the top of it. So all the heat just goes straight through the roof, which is kind of stupid, but that's kind of architectural vanity, I guess, for you. I had asked them to do a vault, and we tried a vault, and it worked, but they were scared of it. So they did a render, a mix of the Hale County dirt, a little bit of cement, and a little bit of cardboard. The cardboard became the aggregate, and that render is actually still there today, so we could have used that. But that's how it finished up. The three students built this between August and February. Cardboard floor, cardboard door, cardboard mortuary slabs for them to sleep on. Round the corner in Newbern, we built Newbern Tigers a new baseball backstop. This was the existing backstop that was built in a weekend. The students had been out there when they were second years and came back 3 years later and asked them if they could help them make their baseball field better. And predictably, these guys said, oh yeah, we remember you. You were here 3 years ago, weren't you? They were actually the only three white folks that had visited the field in 3 years, so everyone remembered them. But they helped them take down the backstop, and we used chain link for the backstop, which is actually very expensive. but we did it in a different manner that you would normally hold chain link. We actually hung the chain link. So these things are hung in big sections, and the challenge was to kind of make this thing beautiful and sculptural so that when there wasn't a game going on, it kind of delighted people. They also had to deal with no electricity and no water for various reasons. So this is it without the team playing, and this is it when the game's going on. And Sunday afternoon, it's probably the most extraordinary place to go in West Alabama. It's Negro League baseball, the remnants of those old leagues, and they play real serious. It's like, you know, we have 55-year-olds who were in the farm system of the Cincinnati Reds even. You know, so there's serious playing going on here. But there's a lot of naughtiness going on behind the field. They sell catfish, they drink beer, they do all sorts of other naughty things. The other thing to see also is that, you know, with them the students being on site for nearly 9 months, they discovered that the bleachers were at 4 o'clock on game day on a Sunday afternoon. The project was, we decided to demo the church, and how do you demo the church without losing your congregation? So by Christmas, they demoed the church, they'd catalogued all of the materials from the church, and they built them a little chapel so they could continue to go to church on a Sunday. And ultimately, we used, I think, 75% of the materials from the old church in the new church. Significant foundation work because the foundations of the original church were being washed away. So we built a retaining wall that pushed the building up close to the cemetery, up the hill. Everyone gets involved. That's actually me. There's a local contractor, county engineers there. You pull a lot of favors in on these projects. This was it on graduation day, May the 5th. A lot of work to do. And what happened, this was a team of 4 folks, 2 guys and 2 girls. And they didn't finish until the end of October. They get their families involved. This is Jared with his 2 brothers. His mum showed up to plane all the wood from the existing building. So we used all the wood from the existing building to side the new building. This is how it looks today. Conceptually, 2 wraps, a north-south wrap and an east-west wrap. The north-south wrap stops short on the north side to give this big, long view of the cemetery. So you can see the cemetery reflected, and there's your view. So when you look out of that window from the nave, you can see exactly where you're going to end up. And then the other thing we gave them, you can just see, we gave them a baptismal font. They wanted 2 things when they were asked about the project. They wanted a baptismal font, they wanted a bathroom. And the baptismal font actually lifts up, and then there's a staircase that you walk down into that kind of disappears into infinity. It's like a big jacuzzi, actually. They rent it out for jacuzzi parties. Only joking. Quickly, we gave Hero a new Main Street building. Essentially, it sort of became like a loft. And this was very controversial because this was, you know, Hero allowing us to do work on Main Street. And it was actually, you know, became sort of a grown-up architect issue. You know, instead of it being hidden out in the woods somewhere, we were on Main Street and dealing with big issues. And we did 2 facades, one way back, which is this kind of Mondrian thing of Pella windows that we get for free from Pella. And then the front facade was based on, not laminated glass, what's the other type? Tempered glass. And apparently, you know, folks that temper glass for shop fronts and things, if they're a little bit out with their dimensions, there's nothing you can do with tempered glass. You can't drill it and you can't cut it. So you go to tempered glass, you go to a glass manufacturer, they're either throwing this stuff away or they're saving a lot of it. And that whole facade's actually based on somebody else's project that didn't fit correctly. In Akron, we built a senior center, turning this building into this. It has a community center on the left and a senior center on the right. For Essie, we gave her this was a little, what we call a neck down project. This lady lived in terrible conditions. The house is essentially falling down, and what we did was we decided to build her a warm, dry room on the back of the house that had a separate foundation and separate electricity to the old building. And because she worked on her own, she shamed the extended family into working with her. She kind of threw her hands up in the air and said, "I'm a girlie, you know, I need help." And it worked fantastically well. What she did was the old restroom of the house was just here. So she put this new piece here, put a restroom in here, and then when the restroom was working, she took this out and made that into kind of a dog trot entrance between the two buildings. That's the new room, and that's the new entrance. We just gave Newburn a new ball field, sponsored by Baseball Tomorrow. These four guys took this horrible piece of land and sculpted it using catfish technology. And they decided to make a backstop made of these bent hoops so that the audience was enclosed. Instead of the backstop going towards the field, the audience was actually enclosed. It's like a big slinky. So when you're part of the audience, you're actually trapped inside the slinky. You can see it. This was opening day. We had, it's actually called Slippery Elm Field because there's one tree over here that was on the site, and it's actually called a slippery elm tree. This is it at night. We had $25,000 of lights donated to do this project. So this project was kind of nice because it was not too flashy. It's not too waving your arms. It was all about digging holes, frankly. A lot of foundation work, a lot of drainage work needed to be done. This is a little building that we did in Thomaston, taking the inside of an old school and making it into a gift shop for something called Rural Heritage. So we connected these two old buildings together with this glass box that slides between one and the other. And we're in the middle of developing this project right now. So this was the first stage. We get these opportunities. One of the things they sell is pepper jelly. They take peppers out of the yard and they make jelly out of it. And one of the big hits of this project was to make a wall of pepper jelly that, you know, as the sun sets in the west, the sun shines through this glass wall and illuminates these jars of pepper jelly. So this is what you enter through to get into the building. Back to the pavilion site, the folks of Perry County liked the project of the pavilion so much that they asked us to do the restrooms. They had $50,000 of grant money left, and they were going to use it for a prefabricated restroom. And so we asked if we could do the toilets, and they said, yes, we'd love you to. So these four guys gave them, I think, probably the three most amazing pooping experiences in the United States of America. There's a tower, there's a mound toilet, and then there's a cantilevering toilet. And the language, and then this walkway goes through the woods and connects you to the pavilion. The language is very similar to the pavilion, except that they were able to cover these in stainless steel because of this $50,000 pot of money. When we asked if we could use the money somewhere else, the funding agency said, no, you can't use it somewhere else, you've got to use it on the restrooms. So we said, okay, we'll cover them in stainless. So that's what we did. This is the tower. That's the pooping experience sitting in the bottom of the tower. It's all clad in cedar. And then this is the cantilever, and that's the view. These two arms go out, so when you're sitting on the john, you can kind of study the tree. And then this is looking down into the mound up the fire lane. It's like, I don't know, I guess it's a kind of really beautiful horizontal view up the fire lane. But one young lady, we tried to work with a contractor on the sheet metal, and it came back ridiculously high. So one of the students, she went off and she found a retired sheet metal worker, and he came down at his weekends and helped her do all that sheet metal. And that was a tough job, believe me. In the same park, we just building a bridge. We had we built this thing. Actually, we put the structure in place this week. So this is really hot off the press. This is a 3 Toblerone sections that span 140 feet across a creek to open up the other part of the park. And we built the 3 sections. So this is a photo montage of it. It's split into 3 sections, and the idea was to crane them into place. This is the view as you go across that bridge. Underneath the Toblerone is going to be a hanging walking surface. So here's the truss. This was last week, actually. They built the trusses away from the site, and then we invented this rig. We put trailer wheels on the back of the rig and a tow bar on the front of the rig and just towed it down to the site. That's actually me running behind it with it. We put them on the back of a pickup, and then we had this huge, great crane donated, which apparently costs typically $500 an hour, and they swung these 3 sections into place. This was really wild. I mean, you know, to understand how to do the staging and to figure all this out was, as a student, I would have just died for this opportunity. I mean, it's amazing what they all fit exactly in place. It's unbelievable. It was all done in the morning. And that's the view of it. So there's these 3 trusses that were connected together. They sit on 4 points. There's two points here, and there's 2 points here. So and then they're counterbalanced. They're tied down at this end and tied down at that end, and then the center section was dropped into place. And it fit exactly. It was pretty remarkable. Fire station in Newburn. The projects have got ridiculously big. I mean, I have to say, these 2 projects are from last year, and they're really only just kind of being done now. This was a fire station community center town hall for Newburn. And we're building it with these huge, great trusses that are essentially 2x8s sandwiched with a steel web in between them, and they kind of finger into each other. So the web goes up like the top and the bottom cord go up like this, and then the roof member fits in like in between the sandwich. So here they are, a couple of weeks ago, being erected. They spent all summer building these things in the backyard. So you can see the scale of this thing. And then at the back is going to be a mezzanine for fire station meetings. And this is important. I mean, this is the first building in Newburn for 110 years. And what we were determined to do with it was make it very urban. Because a lot of fire stations down here are like suburban, and they're pushed all the way back. And we pushed it all the way up to the street. And they really liked the idea locally, so that's what we did. Rural Heritage Center in Thomaston. I'm showing these because some of you all have seen these, and I thought it'd be nice for you to see the latest things. We're in the process of making this huge, great 30-foot by 100-foot sign and wrapping the building with cedar. And this is how we started it. This is where that glass box is. Okay, just to finish, the carpet house, really Mark B's last project that he was involved with at the Royal Studio, I guess it's nearly 3 years ago now, was this carpet house. We were invited by Interface to exhibit our work with them. Interface, the largest manufacturer of carpet tiles in the United States, in fact in the world. And they wanted to team up with us because they liked our kind of approach. And they wanted us to exhibit the work, but they wanted to use cardboard bales. And I said, well, have you not got any waste scraps yourself? And so they sent us these things. You know, they sent us some waste tiles, and then they sent us the shreds from when you cut the carpet. And they were really ugly. So we kind of didn't get anywhere with that. And then they sent us this stuff, and we all went, ooh, that's pretty. So unfortunately, they came in bales that were like